My name is Bertha Carter. I am 29 years old, and the story I am about to tell begins with what seemed like a warm family dinner but ended up leaving me with an emotional slap I will never forget. That evening, at the family table in Austin, I gathered all my courage and told my parents that I needed $70,000 to start a construction software company. I had a business plan, a demo, and even clients ready to commit. But they coldly replied, "Too risky. You already have a stable job, stop dreaming." And to make it worse, my younger sister Vanessa, the so-called golden child in my parents' eyes, leaned back in her chair, gave a mocking smile, and said, "Not everyone is cut out to be an entrepreneur, sis." Those words left me frozen, as if all my effort and passion were worth nothing. A few months later, when my sister Vanessa announced she wanted to launch a luxury event company in Dallas, my parents rushed to take out a $725,000 loan to buy her a BMW and fund everything she needed. And the result? Her company collapsed, the BMW was repossessed, and my parents drowned in debt. Eventually, they came to me, begging me to sell the small condo I had mortgaged to build my business, just to save the family. This time, I simply looked at them calmly and said, "No." Before I dive deeper into this story, I want to ask you, have you ever sat in a room full of family and still felt completely alone? And where are you listening to my story from, and at what time? Please share your story in the comments so I know I am not alone. Thank you so much. I grew up in Austin, Texas, in a 2-story red brick house tucked inside a quiet neighborhood, where summers were scorching hot and winters rarely brought snow. From the outside, anyone would think my family was perfect, a successful couple with 2 daughters raised in comfort, but the truth inside those walls was far from the picture people saw. From a young age, I was the independent child, the one who excelled in school, praised by teachers for my diligence and discipline. My parents never seemed too concerned about my studies, as if good grades were simply the bare minimum I was expected to achieve. If I brought home an A, it was treated as ordinary. But if I slipped and brought home a B, the look of disappointment in their eyes made me feel as if I had done something terribly wrong. Meanwhile, with Vanessa, my younger sister, things were the complete opposite. Vanessa was 3 years younger than me, and from the day she was born, she was placed at the very center of the family. When I was still in elementary school, she was already enrolled in the most expensive ballet studio in the city. I remember clearly the pristine white ballet shoes, the layered tutus, and the grand performances where my parents sat proudly in the front row, cameras in hand, beaming with joy. And there I was, sitting quietly in the corner, clutching my math book, feeling both proud of my sister and painfully aware that even if I were to stand on stage, receiving an academic award, no one would ever look at me with the same admiration. When I entered my teenage years, the favoritism became even more obvious. At 16, all I dared to hope for was an old car to get me to school and my part-time job. Instead, I kept riding the bus, packed shoulder to shoulder with dozens of other students in the suffocating Texas heat. But on Vanessa's 16th birthday, my parents threw a backyard party filled with balloons and twinkling string lights. When a brand new car rolled in with a giant red bow on top, the crowd cheered, cameras flashed, and my parents hugged Vanessa as if she had just achieved something extraordinary. I stood on the sidelines, heavy-hearted. When I asked why I never had such an opportunity, my father simply replied, "You're different. You're already capable, you don't need a fancy car to prove anything." I bit my lip and stayed silent, but deep down I knew his answer was nothing more than an excuse. Another time, I asked for $500 to attend a coding summer camp hosted by a university. I came prepared with information, explaining why it would be such a valuable chance to improve my skills. I truly believed that with such a modest request, they would understand how serious I was. But my mother frowned and shook her head. "Too expensive, Bertha. You can learn programming online for free, you don't need a summer camp." I was so crushed I couldn't argue, and I let the dream go. Just a few weeks later, however, my parents proudly announced they had enrolled Vanessa in a summer acting program in New York that cost over $12,000. I remember vividly how they boasted to the neighbors that their youngest daughter might one day grace a Broadway stage. Same family, same desire to grow, but when it came to me, I was told I was wasting money, while Vanessa was treated like a precious gem. The family celebrations were never any different. I still remember the time I won first place in the statewide science competition. I came home holding the certificate in my hands, my heart racing with excitement. But as soon as I stepped into the living room, I saw everyone gathered around Vanessa, chatting about her ballet performance from the night before. I proudly held up my award, but my mother only glanced at it and said, "That's nice, Bertha. Now come here and look at these photos of your sister in her costume. Doesn't she look beautiful?" My certificate was set down on the table, buried under a pile of magazines, and never mentioned again. Meanwhile, even the smallest award from one of Vanessa's dance contests was enough for my family to throw a celebration. That favoritism didn't just hurt me, it built an invisible wall between us. I learned to be independent, to handle everything on my own, because I realized early on that no one was going to stand by me. I got used to cooking dinner for myself when my mother was busy driving Vanessa to practice, and to studying alone in my room while the whole family went out to cheer for her. Sometimes, I even wondered if I was truly my parents' child, because the difference in treatment was so obvious, so painful. Looking back on those years, I know now that they laid the foundation for who I became. Patient, resilient, but carrying deep scars inside. I learned early on that sharing blood doesn't always mean having a steady place to lean on. The real turning point in my life began when I was accepted into Stanford University. It was the greatest pride I had ever felt, not only because Stanford is one of the most prestigious schools in the United States, but also because I had earned a partial scholarship after years of hard work. The day I received the acceptance letter, I clutched the paper in my hands, tears streaming down my face uncontrollably. But while I was overwhelmed with joy, my parents' reactions were indifferent. My father simply said, "Good, but the tuition is still too high. Are you sure you can handle it?" My mother quickly shifted the conversation to Vanessa's new ballet class. I stood there, both happy and bitter, realizing that this joy belonged only to me, and no one in my family truly shared it. When I started at Stanford, I quickly discovered that even with a scholarship, the cost of living in the Bay Area was far beyond what an ordinary student could afford. I had to start working part-time from my very first year. During the day, I attended lectures, and at night I worked the late shift at the library. On weekends, I helped out in the IT lab. Many nights, I returned to my tiny rented room in Palo Alto, eating a cup of instant noodles with eyes burning from lack of sleep. Each month, I carefully calculated every dollar to cover rent, utilities, and textbooks. At times, I questioned whether I was being too ambitious, but whenever I thought about my dream of working in technology, I clenched my teeth and pushed forward. While I was struggling just to survive, Vanessa was living an entirely different life. The moment she turned 18, my parents bought her a brand new car, not for school, but so she could get around more easily for her performances. They also covered every expense for her to attend an expensive art school in New York. Every time I called home, my mother would gush about Vanessa's shows, her trips, her dazzling costumes. I listened quietly, never daring to compare, but deep down the feeling of unfairness grew stronger. I knew I had never been given such privileges, and I never would. The contrast between the two of us became sharper with time. While I buried myself in studying and working, Vanessa filled her Instagram with carefully curated photos, sitting in chic Manhattan cafes, traveling across Europe with her friends, or posing beside her new car under the city lights. Each post racked up hundreds of likes and glowing comments. From my tiny room, with a cold bowl of instant noodles in front of me, I scrolled through those images and sighed. To my parents, those glamorous snapshots seemed to be proof of success, while my sleepless nights in the library were never acknowledged. Yet it was those very years of hardship that forged my resilience. I learned how to manage my time, how to push past exhaustion to stay focused on my goals, and most importantly, how to rely entirely on myself. No one paid my rent for me, No one handled the stack of bills piling up on the kitchen table, and no one stood by me when I was drained after a night shift. I told myself, if I didn't stand strong, no one else would hold me up. And perhaps it was that solitude that became the well of strength I would only come to recognize later. One winter evening, I sat alone in a quiet library while heavy rain poured outside. On the desk in front of me lay a thick programming manual, hundreds of pages long, next to a cheap boxed meal I had picked up from the campus cafeteria. My hands trembled from the cold and exhaustion, yet inside me burned a strange sense of certainty. I knew I was on the right path. No one saw the sweat and effort I poured into those nights, but I believed that one day my achievements would be recognized by me alone, and that was enough. Whenever I went home for the holidays, I still had to endure constant comparisons. Vanessa has been invited to perform at a major theater, my mother would boast over dinner. She's truly talented, definitely worth the investment. I sat there eating quietly, not even bothering to mention that just a week earlier, I had been selected to serve as a teaching assistant for a professor at Stanford. I knew that no matter how hard I worked, my accomplishments would never be weighed as highly as Vanessa's glittering but fragile dreams. From those silences, I came to understand one truth even more deeply. The only road forward was the one I built for myself, without waiting for validation or support from my family. After graduating from Stanford, I officially stepped into the demanding yet opportunity-filled world of technology. I was hired as a software engineer at a startup in Palo Alto, right in the heart of Silicon Valley, the place where groundbreaking ideas are born daily and where hundreds of companies also vanish within a few short years. On my first day of work, I wore an old, neatly ironed shirt, my hands shaking slightly as I held my brand new employee badge. The feeling was both nerve-wracking and exhilarating because I knew I had come a long way from those sleepless nights in the Stanford library to finally standing there. Working at a startup was anything but easy in the beginning. I had to adapt to the fast pace and the fail fast, learn faster culture. But it was precisely that environment that pushed me to grow beyond my limits. I quickly stood out for my ability to analyze problems and find flexible solutions. After just 1 year, I was entrusted with leading a small team of engineers, something many of my peers my age hadn't even dared to dream of. My salary and company stock finally gave me a bit of financial stability. I bought myself a used but reliable car to get around, and after 2 years, I saved enough for a down payment on a small condo in San Jose. It was the first home of my own, a place where I could lock the door and know with certainty that no one had the right to intrude. While managing multiple software projects, I stumbled upon a glaring gap in the construction industry. One of our clients constantly complained that they couldn't find a project management tool that was both practical and easy to use for everyone from field workers to office staff. The software available on the market was either too expensive, overly complicated, or simply not tailored to the unique needs of construction. My curiosity was piqued, and I began researching on my own. The deeper I dug, the more I realized this wasn't just one company's frustration, it was a widespread pain point across the entire U.S. construction industry. I spent countless evenings after work sketching out ideas, designing interfaces, and even writing the first lines of code for a more efficient construction project management app. I gave it a working name, BuildFlow, the flow of building. At first, I didn't expect much beyond testing my own skills. But then I took a bold step and showed the prototype to a handful of small and mid-sized companies I had connections with. The results were beyond anything I imagined. More than 10 companies responded positively, and 8 of them even committed to paying as soon as the product was complete. I could hardly believe my eyes reading those emails. It was undeniable proof that my idea wasn't just a dream, but something with a real market. That spark of excitement ignited into a fire stronger than ever. I began to think seriously about founding my own company, no longer just treating it as a side project. I could see it clearly, a team of engineers, loyal clients, and a product that could transform how construction companies managed their work. I knew that to turn this vision into reality, I had to step out of my comfort zone, to give up the stability of my current job and leap into building a startup. But to do that, I needed capital. Over the years, I had managed to save around $40,000 from relentless hard work, but it still wasn't enough. Based on my detailed calculations, renting a small office, paying salaries for 2 or 3 initial employees, basic marketing, and covering legal procedures, I needed at least $110,000 for the first year. That meant I was short about $70,000. At first, I considered approaching venture capital firms. But I knew that to convince them, I would need a fully developed product and real paying clients, things I could only achieve after the company had been running for some time. I didn't want to go to the bank either, not yet, because the interest rates were high and I had little to offer as collateral aside from my small condo. The most logical option left, it seemed, was to ask my parents for support. I didn't see it as a gift, but as an investment, one I intended to repay in full. The thought made me both anxious and hopeful. I knew my family's history. I knew that Vanessa had always been the chosen one, but a part of me still believed this time would be different. I was no longer a child. I had a Stanford degree, a stable career, nearly half the required capital saved, and most importantly, real clients waiting for my solution. Surely, all of that would be enough for my parents to finally believe in me. I even pictured the scene in my head, the family sitting together, me presenting my business plan, my parents listening carefully, and then agreeing to fund me. Just once, I wanted them to see me as a woman capable of building her future, not just the daughter who was expected to be smart, but never truly acknowledged. With that in mind, I began drafting a complete business plan, projected costs, development roadmap, revenue forecasts. I spent an entire week polishing a smooth demo, even rehearsing my pitch in front of the mirror. Every word, every chart, every slide I treated with care, as if this were my last chance to prove myself to my family. Deep inside, a flicker of hope burned quietly. Maybe, just maybe, this time they would see me differently. I remember that weekend vividly, when I flew from San Jose back to Austin with a suitcase that carried not only clothes but also all my hopes. I had prepared for the presentation to my family with the utmost care. On my laptop was a business plan spanning dozens of pages, detailed financial projections broken down by quarter, and the build flow demo I had spent countless sleepless nights perfecting. I even printed out the documents, neatly bound into packets so each person could hold one in their hands. On the flight, I kept opening my slides, rehearsing the key lines over and over. I told myself, this time they'll see me differently. This time they won't be able to deny my capability. When I walked into the house, the whole family was already gathered in the living room. My father sat in his usual armchair, eyes glued to the newspaper as if nothing in the world really mattered. My mother bustled around, preparing tea and pastries. Vanessa was there too, wearing a designer dress, her hair curled in waves, phone in hand snapping pictures nonstop. The atmosphere seemed ordinary, even bland, but inside me was a storm. I took a deep breath, opened my laptop, and began. I want to share with you an opportunity that I truly believe will change the course of my career. I started, my voice slightly trembling but filled with determination. I laid out each step, how the construction industry lacked an effective project management tool, how BuildFlow would address that gap, what feedback I had already received from potential clients, and how I plan to use $70,000 in capital to turn this product into a real company. I presented the projections. With 8 companies already committed, first-year revenue was estimated at $300,000, with the potential to double within the next 2 years. I showed them the growth model, the hiring roadmap, the marketing strategy. I spoke with so much conviction and passion that for a moment, I forgot I was standing in front of my parents and not pitching to a room full of venture capitalists in Silicon Valley. When I finished, I looked up waiting for a reaction. What I got back was a cold silence. My father folded down his newspaper and frowned. Sounds nice, but you already have a stable job. Good pay, a place to live. Why take the risk? Starting a business is a gamble. Do you know how many companies fail within their first year? My mother nodded along and added, I don't want to see you struggle. People say being your own boss means freedom, but to me it just sounds like worry and debt. Don't bet your future. I sat there stunned. The words and numbers I had worked so hard to prepare echoed in my mind, but clearly none of it mattered to them. They didn't look at the evidence I'd presented. They didn't believe I was capable. They saw me only as the daughter who was settled now, who shouldn't chase any more dreams. As if that weren't bitter enough, Vanessa leaned back on the sofa and smirked. I agree. Not everyone is cut out to be an entrepreneur, sis. Some people are born to be employees and should stay in their place. Those words, gentle but dripping with contempt, felt like a blade twisting in my chest. I looked at my sister, remembered every favor she'd been shown, every luxury gift I never received, and now she was publicly dismissing my dream in front of the whole family. I felt as if a year's worth of effort, the sleepless nights coding until my eyes burned, the calls with potential clients, the spreadsheets where I analyzed every single line of numbers had all been brushed aside with just a few dismissive words. No one in that room saw me as an adult presenting a real opportunity. In their eyes, I was just Bertha, the daughter who was expected to be smart, but whose every effort was dismissed as fantasy. Silently, I closed my laptop and gathered my papers. My heart pounded, my face burned, but my voice came out strangely calm. I understand. I'll handle it on my own. I didn't wait for another response. I stood up and walked out of the living room. Behind me, I heard my mother's voice calling after me, full of that same false concern. Bertha, I only want what's best for you. But I didn't turn back. I stepped outside, the scorching Texas summer wind hitting my face, and in that moment, I knew one thing for certain: I no longer needed my family's approval. On the way to the airport the next morning, I looked out at the familiar streets, remembering the childhood I had spent in Austin, filled with forgotten memories. I realized this cycle would never change. Vanessa would always be at the center, and my efforts would always be dismissed. And I also understood that if I kept waiting for their support, I would remain stuck forever. That bitter rejection had lit a fire inside me, a fire that roared with one truth: I had to prove I was right, not with words, but with success they could never deny. I returned to San Jose with a heart that was both wounded and hardened. My family's bitter rejection cut deep like a blade, but at the same time, it became the fuel that pushed me to act. I knew that if I kept waiting for their recognition, I would never have it. So I made the decision to take the biggest gamble of my life. A personal loan, secured by the very condo I had worked so hard to buy. When I signed the loan documents, my hands trembled and my heart pounded. I understood clearly that if I failed, I would not only lose my effort and my money, but also the only home I had. Yet one thought kept repeating in my mind: if I don't take the risk now, then when? With the loan in hand, combined with the $40,000 I had saved, I officially founded BuildFlow. Our first office was far from a shiny high-rise. It was a small room rented in an old industrial building on the outskirts of San Jose. The white paint on the walls had already faded, the ceiling leaked in a few places, but to me, it was a symbol of beginning. I hired my first 2 team members, Miguel, a young programmer fresh out of college, and Rachel, an energetic woman who handled client outreach and administrative work. The 3 of us worked around a long table bought from a thrift store, but in my heart, it was our strategy table, the place where ideas that could change the future were born. The first months were so brutal that I nearly gave up more than once. I often worked 18 hours a day, from early morning until late at night. Mornings were for coding, afternoons for calling clients, evenings for handling legal paperwork, and the late nights for tweaking the software. There were times I nodded off right on the keyboard, leaving the keys imprinted on my cheek. Meals were usually cheap sandwiches or instant noodles, though sometimes Rachel, feeling sorry for me, would bring a few home-cooked lunchboxes. Rent for the office, salaries for Miguel and Rachel, the cost of servers for testing, all of it piled into an enormous burden. Each time I saw the balance in our bank account shrink, my throat tightened. There were nights I left the office at 2 in the morning, driving down empty roads and asking myself, am I crazy? Am I repeating what they said, betting my whole future on a fantasy? In those moments, memories of that dinner in Austin would flood back. I remembered my father's indifferent look and my sister's mocking smile. Those images were what pulled me back up and reminded me I could not afford to collapse. If I quit, they would have the excuse to say, "See? We were right." How could? In the 4th month since BuildFlow launched, I nearly hit rock bottom. A potential client canceled their contract at the last minute, leaving a serious gap in our projected budget. I sat stunned in the empty office, listening to the old air conditioner wheeze, my heart heavy as stone. I even considered selling my condo before the bank could foreclose. But just then, an email appeared in my inbox. It was from a mid-sized construction company in Sacramento. They had watched our demo months earlier. The message was short. "We want to try BuildFlow on a new project, 1-year contract, valued at $50,000. I cried right there, tears spilling uncontrollably. After so many days of struggle, we finally had an official customer. On the day we signed that first contract, Miguel, Rachel, and I celebrated with pizza from a discount shop. We sat on the office floor, eating and laughing, cheese grease smeared everywhere, and nobody cared. It wasn't just a meal to mark a new client. It was proof that we could survive, that BuildFlow was no longer just a dream in my head. From that first contract, things began to shift slowly but surely. A few more companies reached out through word of mouth. Customers praised BuildFlow for being easy to use, saving time, and above all, far more affordable than the big software on the market. Revenue climbed gradually, from a few tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands. The long, gloomy months started to show slivers of light. I still worked to the point of exhaustion, but this time my fatigue carried hope. One morning, looking out from our tiny office window, I saw sunlight glinting off new buildings rising across San Jose. I smiled and thought, they were wrong. This path is not an illusion, it's real. In that moment, I knew I would never go back to being a safe employee. I had entered the gamble, and I would see it through to the end. While my small BuildFlow team and I were scraping together every dollar just to keep the lights on, back in Austin, Vanessa was weaving a glamorous dream that only she believed was real. After graduating from art school in New York, my sister never established any stable career. Instead, she returned to Texas with an idea that sounded flashy, launching a media and event company for the elite in Dallas. I still remember the first time my mother told me about it over the phone. Her voice brimmed with excitement, as if Vanessa had just invented something groundbreaking. "She has such vision, Bertha. Dallas is full of wealthy people, and they need luxury event companies to throw parties, weddings, product launches. This will be a goldmine." I bit my lip and said nothing. Inside, my chest tightened. When I presented a detailed plan, with numbers and real client commitments, I was dismissed as too risky. Yet now, a hollow fantasy with no foundation was being celebrated as a golden opportunity. What stunned me even more was the amount of money my parents were willing to put down. Vanessa declared that to build the brand for her event company, she needed to project an image of luxury and class. That meant a luxury car, a grand office, designer clothes. Not only did my parents agree, they went so far as to take out a bank loan of $725,000 to buy her a gleaming BMW for branding, along with a host of other expenses. I could hardly believe my ears when I heard the news. That number was more than 10 times the capital I had once asked for. They had the audacity to call my $70,000 request a gamble, yet borrowing nearly $750,000 for Vanessa's vague idea was somehow a necessary investment. Within just a few months, Vanessa's Instagram had turned into a stage for showing off. She constantly posted pictures of herself attending parties at five-star hotels, sitting in her shiny BMW, holding a sparkling glass of champagne under the lights. Every post carried hashtags like #BossLady, #CEO, #luxury-events. Beneath them were hundreds of admiring comments from friends and acquaintances. My parents often shared those photos too, proudly boasting that their youngest daughter was doing big business. But when I looked at them, all I felt was an indescribable emptiness. I knew what it really meant to be a CEO, what it meant to grind away every single hour just to keep a company alive. What Vanessa was doing was nothing more than building castles in the sand. I tried to reassure myself. Maybe my sister would grow up, maybe she would learn how to manage things properly. But as the weeks went by, I saw no real projects from her company. There were no genuine clients, no long-term contracts, only lavish parties where Vanessa posed for photos far more than she discussed any business. The attendees were mostly her party-going friends, not potential customers. I knew that behind those glittering lights, the finances were sinking fast. And just as I predicted, within a year Vanessa's event company was drowning in debt. The rent for her downtown Dallas office was too high, the party expenses kept ballooning, and revenue was nearly non-existent. Bank loans started coming due. The luxury BMW quickly turned into a massive burden, bringing in no contracts while draining thousands of dollars each month in maintenance and loan payments. I heard from an old friend in Austin that Vanessa had even resorted to borrowing short-term cash just to keep up the appearance of her company, but in reality, no one wanted to partner with a business built only on glamour without substance. My parents, of course, refused to admit failure. They kept defending Vanessa, insisting that every company struggles in the beginning, and that, with more time and more capital, she'll prove herself. But I could see the truth clearly. My sister's company had no solid foundation, no distinctive product or service, no real clients. It was nothing more than a lavish shell hiding an empty core. Meanwhile, I was still waking up early and staying up late, pouring 18 hours a day into BuildFlow. I felt like I was living in two parallel worlds. One, the harsh reality where success only came after sweat and tears. The other, a shallow illusion where money was thrown away to buy an image of luxury that meant nothing. That contrast didn't just hurt, it made me angry. Angry that what I needed, a small amount of capital to build something real, had been denied. Angry that, at the same time, a hollow fantasy was being coddled and endlessly funded as if money would never run out. 2 years had passed since the day I signed those personal loan papers, putting up my little San Jose condo as collateral to build BuildFlow. It wasn't a long time, but to me, every day was a battle, every week a fight for survival. And now, looking back, I could hardly believe how far we had come. BuildFlow was no longer just a small name on a worn-out sign in a shabby rented office. It had grown into a company generating $600,000 a year, serving more than 30 clients in the construction industry across California. I still remember the first big contract that marked a turning point. A construction company in San Jose decided to roll out BuildFlow across their entire new apartment project. When we received that first payment check, my team and I cried like children. From then on, with every project we completed, we earned more trust from clients. They recommended us to their partners, those partners passed our name to others, and the circle kept expanding. Soon enough, BuildFlow was present at job sites across the West Coast. Meetings with clients were no longer confined to our tiny office but took place at large construction conferences, where the name BuildFlow began to be mentioned as a solution worth noticing. That success also drew the attention of venture capital firms in Silicon Valley. One morning, I received an email from a partner in Menlo Park inviting me to present BuildFlow. I walked into a gleaming glass-walled conference room, facing familiar faces I had only ever seen on the cover of Forbes. This time, unlike that bitter evening in Austin, I didn't have to strain to prove my worth. The numbers, the contracts, and the positive feedback from clients spoke for themselves. I saw their eyes light up as they heard about BuildFlow's growth, watched the smooth demo, and listened to my story of building a company out of a condo I had mortgaged. In that moment, I knew I was no longer the dreamer child in my family's eyes, but a true founder. While BuildFlow was slowly finding its footing on the path to sustainable growth, on the other side, Vanessa's glittering dream finally collapsed. Her event company declared bankruptcy in less than 2 years. The Dallas office shut down quietly, the website went offline, and her social media accounts were wiped clean of the glamorous images she had once posted nonstop. The BMW that was supposed to be her brand symbol was repossessed by the bank, towed away in broad daylight under the eyes of the neighbors. My parents, who had once proudly paraded their youngest daughter as a fashionable CEO, were now drowning in a loan of more than $700,000, interest piling on top of interest. I first heard the news from a mutual friend in Austin, and then from my mother's frantic phone calls. She told me the bank was pressing them relentlessly. My father was forced to sell off assets just to keep afloat, but it still wasn't enough. Even the red brick two-story house I grew up in was being discussed as collateral. In her voice, I heard exhaustion and fear, but not a single note of admission that their decisions had been mistakes. She still blamed the market, the economy, bad luck. I stayed silent because by now I was too familiar with their refusal to face the truth. The irony of fate could not have been clearer. The one once dismissed as delusional, brushed aside without mercy, was now proving her ability step by step through real results. Meanwhile, the one who had been praised and unconditionally funded had collapsed quickly, leaving behind cracks in both the finances and the reputation of the entire family. I didn't rejoice at my parents' hardship, but I couldn't deny there was a certain vindication. All those years of being underestimated had now been answered by this sharp contrast in outcomes. One evening, I sat alone in my new office, spacious, bright, with the BuildFlow logo neatly mounted on the wall. I looked back at the road I had traveled and thought of that night in Austin, when I stood up from the dinner table, clutching my laptop, and walked away in silence. They had not believed in me, and perhaps they never truly would. But the truth had already revealed itself. I was not the helpless dreamer they thought I was, but the only one who dared to turn dreams into reality. The devastating news came late one evening as I was reviewing a newly signed contract with a large construction company in Oakland. My phone buzzed, my mother's name flashing on the screen. At first, I considered ignoring it, certain nothing good could come from that call. But something made me pick up. On the other end, my mother's voice trembled. "Bertha, we need your help. The house is about to be taken by the bank. If you can send $100,000, we can save it and pay down part of the debt." I froze, pen still in my hand hovering over the contract. $100,000. They were asking for the amount it would take me an entire year of grueling work to earn. Before I could respond, my father cut in, his voice firm, commanding. "Bertha, you're successful now, you have money. The family is in crisis. We raised you from childhood, it's time for you to repay us." My grip on the phone tightened until my knuckles turned white. That phrase, repay us, made my blood boil. I remembered every time I had asked for support, every time I had been dismissed as a burden. They had never invested in me, yet now they demanded that I save them as if it were my natural duty. I tried to keep my voice calm. "Mom, Dad, I can't. $100,000 is not a small amount. And my condo is the only thing I have left. I mortgaged it to start this business. It is the foundation for everything. I cannot sell it." But instead of understanding, I heard a reproachful sigh. My mother began to cry. "We'll lose the house, Bertha. Can you really watch your parents end up on the street?" Then, as if to finish me off, my father added, "If you truly care about the family, you should sell the condo. Use that money to save everyone." I was stunned. That condo was not just an asset, it was the symbol of every risk, sacrifice, and bit of perseverance I had put into this. It proved the path I had taken, the nights I worked until I was exhausted, every step of my growth. And yet they treated it like an item that could be sold at any moment to patch the holes created by their own bad decisions. I couldn't hold back any longer. Years ago, I asked for $70,000 to invest in a clear plan with customers and real potential. You called it risky. But when Vanessa wanted to start her airy fantasy company, you were willing to throw $725,000 in loans at it, buy a BMW, and host parties. Isn't that risky? Or am I the only one who's considered a risk? There was a few seconds of silence on the line, then my father's voice hardened. "You don't understand. Vanessa needs help more. She has dreams." I cut him off, unable to take it. Don't I have dreams? Don't I need help? For years I've been self-reliant. I haven't complained. But now, after everything, you want to take away the only thing I have? No, I can't. My mother's sobs filled the line, mixed with desperate pleas. Bertha, you're our only hope. Don't turn your back on the family. I took a deep breath, tears already slipping down my face. I'm not turning my back, I'm setting boundaries. I won't let my life's work be buried because of someone else's mistakes. I'm sorry, but I won't do it. After the call, I sat in the darkened office, the streetlights outside casting my tired reflection onto the glass. Inside me was a storm of pity and anger. I pitied them for being buried under such enormous debt, pitied my mother's panic, pitied my father's fading confidence. But I was furious to my core at the injustice of it all, furious that they still refused to see my worth, treating me only as a backup vault when things went wrong. That night, I didn't go straight back to my condo. I drove aimlessly through the quiet streets of San Jose, remembering the nights coding in the dark, the cold bowls of noodles, the moments I thought I might collapse. If I had given up back then, there would be no BuildFlow, no version of me standing here today. I had saved myself without anyone's help. So why should I save them now, when they were the very ones who dismissed me and left me behind from the beginning? When I finally returned home, I stood in front of my little condo, running my hand over the paint chipped by the California sun and wind. This condo was living proof of my journey. And I swore I would never let anyone take it from me, not even my own family. From that moment on, I knew I had drawn a boundary that could never be broken, a boundary of finances, of emotions, and of my own self-respect. One autumn afternoon in San Jose, just as I had finished a meeting with my engineering team about the latest BuildFlow update, the doorbell rang insistently. I frowned, surprised since I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened the door, standing before me were my father, my mother, and Vanessa. They stood in a line, their faces weary, their eyes a mix of worry and desperation. I wasn't surprised after their failed plea over the phone. I knew eventually they would show up in person. Still, seeing them there made my chest tighten, not out of pity, but because all the memories of an unfair childhood came flooding back. "We need to talk," my father said, trying to hold on to his usual authority, though I could hear the tremor in his voice. Quietly, I stepped aside and let them in. My small, modest condo stood in stark contrast to everything they had once lavished on Vanessa, the luxury cars, the glittering parties. They settled onto the sofa while I sat across from them, the distance between us feeling like an invisible boundary. My mother spoke first, her tone pleading. "Bertha, what happened with your sister's company? No one could have predicted it. The market shifted, the economy was tough. How could we have known? If we'd had just a little more luck, things might have turned out differently." I looked straight at her, saying nothing. Vanessa sat beside her, eyes red, though I knew most of it came from the fear of losing her glamorous facade, not from genuine remorse. My father continued, "You have to understand, business always comes with risks. Your sister was simply unlucky. As her older sister, you should be helping her through this." "Oh." I drew in a deep breath, forcing my voice to stay steady. "Risk?" I remember when I asked for $70,000 to invest in BuildFlow. I presented a detailed plan, with committed clients and projected revenue. Back then, you called it too risky. But with Vanessa, whose company had nothing but Instagram pictures, you were willing to borrow $725,000. That wasn't risk. That was blindness. The room fell into silence. I continued, my tone growing firmer with every word. "It's always been like this. When I asked for $500 to attend a coding summer camp, you said no because it was too expensive. Right after that, Vanessa got $12,000 for an acting camp in New York. When I won a statewide science award, you barely paid attention. But when Vanessa landed a supporting role in a school play, the family threw a party. When I got into Stanford on a partial scholarship, all you could talk about was money. But when she studied art in New York, you covered every expense without a word. For years, I've had to handle everything on my own, while she was handed every advantage. And now, When that favoritism has led to debt, you expect me to sell my condo, the condo I mortgaged, to build my company, to bail out the family. Tell me honestly, have you ever once thought about fairness? I stared straight at them, unblinking. My mother lowered her head, tears streaming down her face. My father pressed his lips tightly together but had no rebuttal. Vanessa opened her mouth to speak, but the sharp look in my eyes cut her off, leaving her silent. The truth was too clear, too painful, for them to hide behind excuses any longer. I am not this family's bank. I am not the backup plan to patch over other people's mistakes, I said, each word ringing clear. I have endured enough bitterness to understand one thing. My worth is not measured by how many people I can rescue, but by the fact that I rescued myself. If you need help, look elsewhere. I am no longer here to be your lifeline. The room fell silent. I stood, walked toward the door. My hand rested on the knob, but I turned back one last time, my voice cold but steady. I am no longer the daughter waiting for this family's approval. I have built my own life, and I will protect it. I am not anyone's backup plan anymore. Then I opened the door, gesturing for them to leave. My mother rose, her eyes red, pleading. Bertha, please, we're family. I shook my head and answered firmly. Family doesn't mean I have to sacrifice my entire life to pay for favoritism. I'm sorry. With that, I shut the door. The sound echoed through the condo, a full stop to a dependency that had gone on far too long. Leaning back against the door, I drew a deep breath. Tears slid down my face, but I knew I had made the right choice. For the first time in my life, I felt free from the burden of proving myself, of carrying others, of saving what was never mine to save. In that moment, I truly stepped out of my family's shadow, ready to live for myself. 6 months had passed since the day I closed the door of my San Jose condo on my parents and Vanessa. In that time, I lived in a strange kind of quiet. No more desperate phone calls, no more guilt-ridden text messages, no heavy presence of family in my daily life. The contact became so scarce that sometimes it felt as if we belonged to two different worlds. The only news I heard about them came through acquaintances in Austin. The red brick house had been mortgaged to cover debt, my father sold his old car and pulled from his retirement early, and my mother spent more time at church, praying. Vanessa moved in with her boyfriend, trying to rebuild her online image, but the allure was gone. In the end, each of them had to bear the consequences on their own. While my family unraveled, BuildFlow entered a stage of explosive growth. We had just signed a contract with one of the largest construction corporations in California, deploying our software across dozens of sites throughout the state. Revenue surged, and our team grew from the original 3 to more than 20 employees. Every day when I walked into the office and saw the BuildFlow logo gleaming on the glass wall, I was filled with pride. This success hadn't come from luck, but from sleepless nights of persistence, from difficult choices I had refused to back away from. I decided to move out of the small condo in San Jose and rent a charming house in Palo Alto. The house had a little garden in the back, just enough space for me to grow roses and lavender. In the mornings, I brewed myself a cup of coffee, stepped out to tend the flowers, and breathed in the fresh air before starting my day. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to slow down a little, to enjoy the rewards instead of only running to survive. I also began attending startup community gatherings in Silicon Valley. I shared my story, how I went from being the daughter dismissed by her family, labeled as a dreamer, to building a software company generating hundreds of thousands of dollars in revenue. Each time I told it, I saw the empathy and admiration in the eyes of young entrepreneurs walking the same path. They saw in me the proof that you don't need a privileged starting point, only persistence and the will to keep going to create something real. One time, a senior from UC Berkeley approached me after a talk. She said her parents were pressuring her to go into medicine because it was safe, even though her real dream was computer science. She asked me, "How did you overcome the fear when your whole family was against you?" I smiled, held her hand tightly, and said, "I chose to believe in myself. Because in the end, only you will live your life fully." Watching the tears glisten in her eyes, I realized my story was no longer just a personal journey, it had become a source of strength for those trapped under the weight of blind expectations. I slowly came to understand a truth I had resisted for years. My worth was never rooted in my parents' approval. It came from my relentless effort, from the skills I honed, and from the people who truly valued me, my teammates at BuildFlow, the clients who trusted me, and even strangers who found hope in my journey. Blood family can abandon you, favor others, or belittle you, but none of that defines who you are. One evening, I sat in the backyard, watching the sunset paint the Palo Alto sky a deep shade of orange. In my hands was a notebook where I had been recording my reflections after this long journey. I wrote, "Family is not always a place of support. Sometimes they are the chains that hold you back. Setting boundaries does not mean being ungrateful, it means knowing how to love yourself. Because you deserve to be surrounded by those who truly respect and value you." When I closed the notebook, a quiet smile formed on my face. I no longer felt the anger I once carried, nor the longing for an apology. What I felt instead was a deep sense of relief, as if I had finally laid down a burden that had weighed on me for years. My family might still be drowning in debt and favoritism, but I had stepped out of that cycle and found my own path, a path filled with struggle, but glowing with light. And for me, that was enough.